The rope creaked softly in the early morning wind. At 6:23 a.m. on a quiet Sunday in September 1946, Marcus Garvey Park was nearly empty. The city had not fully awakened yet. A thin layer of fog clung to the grass, and the tall oak trees stood like silent witnesses, their branches stretching over the walking paths that cut through the park. An elderly woman walked her dog along the northern entrance, following the same routine she had kept for years. She noticed something unusual ahead, something hanging from one of the old oak trees. At first, she thought it was clothing, laundry, maybe, something caught by the wind. Then she stepped closer. She screamed. The sound echoed through the park, sharp and panicked, breaking the morning calm. The dog barked wildly as she stumbled backward, staring up at the tree, her hands shaking. At 6:47 a.m., the NYPD arrived. Detective Robert Walsh was the first officer to step out of the patrol car. 20 years on the force had shown him everything New York had to offer: murders, robberies, bodies left in alleys. But the moment he looked up at the oak tree, he stopped walking. His breath caught in his throat. A young black man hung from a noose tied to a thick branch. His feet dangled 3 feet above the ground. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, the kind that told a trained eye this was not quick, not merciful. This was slow, painful. Walsh didn't need to touch the body to know that. The boy looked 19, maybe 20. He wore a Columbia University sweatshirt, khaki pants, and only one shoe. The other lay somewhere in the grass below, kicked off during a desperate struggle. Deep rope burns circled his wrists. He had fought. He had clawed. He had tried to free himself. Pinned to his chest was a piece of paper, handwritten in crude block letters. Know your place. Walsh felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. This wasn't just a murder. This was a message. The tree stood in clear view of 3 surrounding streets. Whoever had done this wanted people to see it, wanted Harlem to wake up to it, wanted fear to travel faster than the morning sun. Detective Sullivan joined him, his face pale as he followed Walsh's gaze upward. "Jesus Christ," Sullivan whispered. Walsh reached into the dead boy's pocket and pulled out a wallet. His hands were shaking now. Inside was a student ID. Thomas Johnson, Columbia University. First year pre-law. Walsh closed his eyes. Not the Johnson. Sullivan read the name over his shoulder and went silent. They both knew exactly what it meant. "Notify next of kin," Sullivan said quietly. Walsh nodded, though his throat felt tight. "His uncle is Ellsworth Johnson." Sullivan looked back at the body, then at the note, then at the tree. Bumpy Johnson. Walsh didn't answer. They stood there in silence, 2 men in uniform, understanding something neither of them wanted to say out loud. 5 white men had lynched a black teenager in New York City, not in the Deep South, not in the shadows, in the open. And even if they found them, even if they arrested them, the system would not deliver justice. It never did. "What did we put in the report?" Sullivan asked. Walsh stared at the ground for a long moment. He thought about the oath he'd taken, about justice, about the law. Then he thought about reality. Finally, he spoke. "Suicide." Sullivan turned to him sharply. "What?" "We write suicide," Walsh said again, his voice harder now. "We file it, we notify the family, and then we stay out of what happens next." Sullivan swallowed. He looked at the body one last time, then nodded. "Suicide," he repeated. The report was filed before noon. By 7:12 a.m., the phone rang in a quiet Harlem office. Bumpy Johnson listened without speaking as the words poured through the receiver. His face showed nothing, no anger, no shock, just stillness. When the call ended, he remained seated for several minutes, the phone resting loosely in his hand. Memories flooded in uninvited, teaching Thomas chess as a boy, watching him graduate, driving him to Columbia on his first day. The pride in his sister Ruth's eyes. Then Bumpy stood and reached for his coat. Ruth Johnson lived 4 blocks away. When he arrived, her apartment was already full. Neighbors crowded the small living room, whispering, offering comfort that could not reach a mother whose only child had been taken from her. Ruth looked up when Bumpy entered. Her eyes were swollen, broken. "They took my baby," she said. Bumpy sat beside her and took her hand. "The police say it was suicide," she whispered, "but my boy would never—" "It wasn't," Bumpy said quietly. She looked at him, searching his face. "Then what was it?" "Murder." Ruth began to shake. Bumpy held her as she cried, feeling something unfamiliar twist inside his chest. Helplessness. When her tears finally slowed, Bumpy spoke again, his voice low and steady. "I'm going to handle this." Ruth looked up. "Will it bring him back?" "No." "Then why?" Bumpy met her eyes. "Because if this goes unanswered, it will happen again." Ruth was silent for a long moment, then she nodded once. "Do what you have to do." Outside, Harlem moved on with its Sunday morning. But something had changed. A message had been delivered, and another was about to be sent. Bumpy Johnson returned to Marcus Garvey Park alone. The police had done their work quickly, too quickly. The rope was gone, the body was gone. The oak tree stood clean, innocent, as if nothing had happened beneath it. But Bumpy knew better. He had spent his life reading places the way other men read books. And this place was still talking. 5 cigarette butts lay near the tree, crushed into the dirt, different brands. Men waiting. Work boots had left deep impressions in the soft ground, heavy, careless. A button lay half buried near the roots, dark blue, the kind found on factory uniforms. Near the fence, a burned matchbook rested in the grass. Ali's Tavern, East 96th Street. Bumpy picked it up and slipped it into his coat. Someone else had been there that morning, someone invisible. He found Curtis near the north entrance, sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. Curtis had slept in the park for years, the kind of man people looked through. Bumpy sat beside him. "Morning, Curtis." Curtis stiffened. "Mr. Johnson, I didn't see nothing." "You saw something," Bumpy said calmly, "and you're going to tell me, then you'll be safe." Curtis hesitated, then leaned closer. 5 white men came before sunrise, smoking, laughing, talked about teaching some Columbia Negro a lesson. "Names?" "One tall guy, dark hair, others called him Danny." Bumpy nodded. That was enough. By nightfall he had the rest. Danny Morrison, auto mechanic, Bronx, lived alone. Rick Sullivan, factory worker, married, garage behind the house. Lou Bennett, hunter, outdoorsman, upstate weekends. Frank Dorsey, shipping clerk, family man. Charlie Ross, quiet, nervous, weak. 5 men. Bumpy gathered his inner circle that evening. Illinois Gordon, Willie Lee, Quick Jackson, Marcus Cole. Men who had survived wars, prisons, betrayals. "They lynched Thomas," Bumpy said. No one spoke. 7 days, he continued. Each of them learns what they did. No mistakes, no noise. They nodded. Day 1 ended. Danny Morrison died on day 2. He was working in his garage that night, grease on his hands, radio playing low. He never heard them come in. 3 men, silent, efficient. They bound his hands with rope, the same kind he had used on Thomas Johnson. Willie Lee threw the rope over the ceiling beam. Danny understood immediately. "No, please." They lifted him slowly, let him feel it, 30 seconds. Then they dropped him, let him breathe, let hope return. Then they lifted him again. On the 4th time, they left him hanging. A note was pinned to his chest. 1 down. Day 3 belonged to Rick Sullivan. Gasoline soaked the garage floor while Rick worked, unaware. His exits were sealed. When the match dropped through the mail slot, he screamed. He survived. Barely. 60% burns. His face melted beyond recognition, a lifetime of pain ahead of him, pinned to the mailbox outside. 2 down. Lou Bennett ran on day 4. He ran into the woods, deeper than he'd ever gone. For 3 days, he was hunted, not touched, just followed, watched, whispered to. By the time search parties found him, he was broken, mumbling apologies to trees, begging forgiveness from ghosts. Doctors called it trauma. In his hand, 3 down. Frank Dorsey lost everything on day 5. His house burned while he slept in a hotel. Flames eating memories, photographs, futures. The fire chief called it professional arson. On the mailbox, 4 down. Charlie Ross knew he was next. On the morning of day 6, he drove toward the police station shaking. He never made it inside. Illinois Gordon stopped him 3 blocks away. Charlie cried, begged, promised. Illinois showed him a photograph of Thomas Johnson. "You have one chance," Illinois said. "Convince your people to disappear." That night, 15 men gathered in a warehouse on East 98th Street. They argued, they voted. 10 stayed. 5 left. Across the street, Bumpy counted. Then he nodded. Fire came on day 7. Molotovs shattered windows. Flames devoured the building. The exits were sealed. 7 men died inside. 3 escaped burned, screaming, ruined. The official report called it an accident. By sunrise, the KKK no longer existed in Harlem. And the message was clear. Thomas Johnson's funeral filled Abyssinian Baptist Church beyond capacity. More than 3,000 people stood shoulder to shoulder in silence, lining the aisles, spilling out onto the street. Men removed their hats. Women clutched handkerchiefs. Children stood unnaturally still, sensing the weight of something larger than grief. The casket at the front was closed. Ruth Johnson had insisted on that. She wanted her son remembered as he had lived, smiling, brilliant, full of promise, not as the message they had tried to turn him into. Bumpy Johnson stood beside his sister throughout the service. He did not cry. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes carried something heavy, something final. Every hymn, every prayer, every word spoken about Thomas's future cut deeper than anger ever could. A future stolen, a lawyer Harlem would never have. When the service ended, the crowd followed the hearse to the cemetery in slow, silent lines. No police escort, none were needed. Harlem protected its own now. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Bumpy stepped forward. He placed a single envelope on top of the polished wood, then stepped back. Ruth noticed it. "What is that?" she asked softly. "Proof," Bumpy replied. Inside the envelope were photographs. Danny Morrison hanging in his garage, Rick Sullivan's burned face, wrapped in bandages, Lou Bennett being carried out of the woods, eyes empty, Frank Dorsey standing in front of the ashes of his home, and one final image, the warehouse on East 98th Street consumed by fire. Ruth closed her eyes when she saw them. "Is it over?" she asked. "Yes." "Did they understand?" Bumpy looked at the grave. "Every one of them understands loss now." Ruth nodded once. That was enough. After September 1946, something shifted in Harlem. It wasn't spoken about openly. There were no headlines, no official statements, but men who wore white hoods stopped meeting. Basements went quiet. Robes were burned. Names disappeared. Fear had changed sides. The police closed their files quickly. Accidental fire, unrelated incidents, no suspects. Detective Walsh read every report in silence, then placed them in a drawer he would never open again. He slept poorly after that. Years passed. Harlem changed. The city changed. Bumpy Johnson grew older, slower, but no less watchful. He returned to running his world with the same careful balance of power and restraint he had always used. What happened in those 7 days was never repeated. It didn't need to be. In 1963, 17 years later, a reporter tracked Bumpy down. The interview took place in a quiet room. A tape recorder sat on the table between them, spinning softly. "Mr. Johnson," the reporter began, "rumors have persisted for years that you were responsible for the deaths and attacks on 12 men in September 1946, men allegedly connected to your nephew's death. Would you care to comment?" Bumpy leaned back in his chair. He was 61 now. His hair was grey. His body carried the weight of time, but his eyes were still sharp. "My nephew wanted to be a lawyer," Bumpy said. "He believed in the law, in courtrooms, in judges." "And you?" the reporter asked. "He believed in it too," Bumpy replied, "until the law called my nephew's lynching a suicide." The reporter hesitated. "So you took justice into your own hands?" Bumpy leaned forward. "I didn't take anything. Justice was owed. The courts refused to deliver it, so it came from somewhere else." "But doesn't that make you no better than—" "Than who?" Bumpy interrupted, his voice suddenly hard. "Men who lynched a 19-year-old for being black and educated? Police who buried the truth? A system that has been failing black families since this country was founded? The reporter said nothing. "You want to know if I regret it?" Bumpy continued. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that 1 year after fighting fascism overseas, we were still fighting terror at home. I regret that my nephew died believing the system would protect him." The tape recorder hummed. "The men who died," Bumpy said quietly, "got exactly what they gave. They took a life. Lives were taken from them. They destroyed a future. Their futures were destroyed. That's not revenge. That's balance." The reporter turned off the recorder. The interview was never published, but the story lived on. It passed through Harlem like a warning, like a promise. Parents told it in whispers. Elders nodded when it was mentioned. The message endured long after the fire had cooled and the graves had settled. Touch Harlem's children, and Harlem will answer. Not with court filings, not with speeches, but with something older, something final. Thomas Johnson was buried beneath the soil of New York, but his name did not disappear. He became a symbol of what was taken and what was defended, a reminder of the cost of silence, a reminder of what happens when systems fail and communities are left to protect themselves. He wanted to be a lawyer. His uncle became his justice, and for generations afterward, the KKK never returned to Harlem. Not once, because some messages once delivered never need repeating.